Good morning and welcome to Artefact Live, where we look at the art and science of storytelling with me, Scott McArthur. Thanks very much for tuning in. If it's your first time here, as normal, I always ask people to stick their name in the chat and tell us where they're tuning in from. Even if you're on #replay, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Well, last week we had an interesting discussion about leadership, and it's one that I think that, as I've said this right from the very beginning, so 32 weeks ago, I said I think storytelling is the secret competence of leadership. And it's something that I've only really come to realize myself. And, right, I've used it for years, particularly when I was doing pitching, but I think I didn't realize just how important it was until probably about 18 months ago when I started to do it. This sort of thing, I started to tell my own stories and use my artifacts to do it. So it's something that I'm quite excited about, and I will definitely come back to it because I do think there's a lot to talk about. I've started to gather together some very specific examples of how people can use leadership stories to actually affect change and transformation and even metamorphosis, as I said last week, in their organizations. So thanks for the questions. I do appreciate it. I think there's a couple of people have asked me about some specific issues around transformational change. I'll have a think about it. I mean, I've got a model for it, but I'd like to just tweak it a little bit. And I think what I might do is have a whole week where we look at an intervention that can help you in the leadership space. Now, I know that's not going to turn everybody on who tunes in, but this week will, because we're looking at magic. So I'm really excited. I've got Dr. Matt Pritchard with me today, who's brilliant, a really enthusiastic, fantastic magician. So we'll get to Matt in a minute. But nevertheless, I'm excited about all this coming together into a shape that I think can really, really help people to see how to use stories at work. Now, this week, what's been happening? Well, I've got another keynote coming up. I'm averaging one a week at the moment, which is quite good. It's not quite where I was before lockdown. I was doing 2 or 3 a week, but I've got one on Monday where I'm telling stories about mainly around what is horribly called human capital. And it's something that I've had a problem with that for years. But I'm going to talk about that in the context of project management and program directors roles across Europe. And it's the Greek Project Management Society that I'm speaking at. So I'm quite excited about it. It's such a shame. I've spoken there 3 or 4 times before, and it was always a great trip over to Athens or Thessaloniki. I can't say it, never can say that properly. Before, and unfortunately, I'm going to be stuck here in my study, so it's not quite the same. But nevertheless, I'm looking forward to it, and I know a couple of you are tuning in. So thanks very much for watching. I hope this gives you a flavour for what we'll do on Monday. So to today, I'd like to introduce my guest now. Now, this Matt is a chap I've known. I think it's a couple of years. Well, let's get Matt on, actually, rather than me prattling away on my own here. Sorry, Matt, I'm just talking.
Hi there, everyone.
Hi, Scott. This is Matt. Matt, we met via the Professional Speaking Society, didn't we?
Yeah, must be 3-4 years ago now. You have to take away at least a year of our lives, don't we, because of the pandemic?
Yes. And I think that was in Birmingham. I've got a shady memory of it. I remember you being. Yeah, it was in Birmingham because I remember bumping into you and having a cup of tea with you at the back. You're one of the people that were nice to me on my first day. I remember that. So anyway, so can you tell everyone what it is you do, please, Matt? Would you mind doing that?
Yeah, so there's 2 parallel strands to what I do. In fact, I might be able to illustrate. I love making things. So this is a concertina piece of paper, and when the letters align, you can see the word science there. So my background is science research. So I was a physicist. I worked with lasers. I made things really cold with lasers, which seems really counterintuitive. And then I moved into science communication. I work a lot in schools. But the other side of me is this side, which is it's back to fronts. This should be the word magic. So if we get a mirror involved, and you'll see later, I think that I love mirrors, we can probably reverse this. So let's put this in play here, and we can see we've got the science and the magic side of what I do. So I call myself a science magician. So magic's been a hobby of mine since I was 10 years old. sort of typical story for many people getting into magic. They got a book or a kit as a kid, and I just didn't outgrow it. It's a wonderful hobby, and now it's a job, and I fuse them both and look at the interplay between science and magic.
Brilliant. It's interesting because I'm not a magician, as you know, but I have been fascinated by magic since I was at school. And it actually came from Arthur Clarke in this very famous The Third Law of Robotics.
Yes.
He talked about any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I remember reading the robot books when I think I was about, God, Matt, I must have been about 9, which is about 1 million years ago. And I thought, oh, and that got me. And I remember speaking to my grandfather, Matt, and he had seen Houdini in Glasgow, wow. You know, and that was it. I was hooked. And I don't have a broad knowledge like you do, but I am absolutely fascinated by it. And I guess that's the first thing I'd like to ask you. I mean, why is it that so many of us are so captivated by magic? What is it about it that you think captures our imaginations?
I think there's a few things. I think one of those things is this hidden knowledge. I think we all like to know that we know more than other people, and so particularly as socially awkward teenagers, it's a nice place where you feel you've got something that others haven't, and it can be power. I think magic is power as well. And I think we'll talk about later, Scott, we'll talk about magic can be influence as well. And yes. I think you look at traditional magic, the supernatural, rather than my theatrical side of magic.
Yeah,
magic in a lot of ways is a power transaction between the magician and the world and the gods, and it's this. It's power, and it can be as a teenager it could be very alluring as well. I think there's also an escapism to magic as well. That's when you're stuck in what can be quite a dull, mundane, frustrating life. Magic provides that escape route. It provides new possibilities, new dreams to explore, and there isn't barriers there saying you can't do this. And so I think those are two things. It just it's magic can be releasing.
That's fascinating. I tell you, I had an experience where I was reading one of Derren Brown's books, famous mesmerist, and I have to say, I don't like his style. I find his writing quite difficult. But at one point, he talked about how if you could guess the password, you probably know this, on his website, the sort of the book of all books in terms of close-up card magic is on there. And I guessed that it was Barnum. It was one of the classic, magician type passwords, if you like. And I got the book, and I tried to do card magic. Oh my bloody God. I mean, the amount of effort it takes to get, I'm sure you're going to show us some of your stuff, but the thing that I really got very early on was, this is not something you just pick up and do. This is complicated, difficult, a difficult thing to do. Do you think people appreciate that? I know you appreciate that, but do you think people just think, oh, you just buy it and do it? Do you think that's how people perceive it?
I think you're right. Magic can be quite hard to start off with once you get past your initial trick or two. I think some of that is if you're going to be doing sleight of hand magic, you end up using muscles in your hands and fingers that you just didn't know existed. And to get a grasp of that, you really have to put the work in to strengthen those muscles. I'm not particularly adept at sleight of hand magic. My hand-eye coordination, my timing is terrible on that front. And so I rarely do sleight of hand magic. I tend to play to my strengths, which tends to be my memory and being able to calculate things quickly. And so that's what I use for my magic, as opposed to the more sleight of hand side. Yes. And so that can be a barrier for beginners starting off, especially if you dip in like you did, Scott, to a book which is probably a more advanced book.
Oh yeah, way beyond me.
Started with the beginning books. There's a few which physically the first chapter is just how to hold a pack of cards. because once you've got the foundations in place, and once you know this is this finger and the names for different parts of the anatomy, it makes it easier. But I think the other thing people really struggle with when they're getting to grips with magic is this duality between what you as a magician are experiencing and what the audience is experiencing. So even just taking an example of vanishing a coin, often the coin is retained in the hand that initially had the coin in.
Yes.
And so you're moving your other hand with an invisible object, but you're having to give your body language that the coin is there. And so there's a real divide in your head between what am I physically doing with my hands,
yes,
and what am my audience seeing and experiencing, and trying to not make the connection between the two. Magicians often talk about misdirection, which is this term which is often thought of as, oh, we didn't see it because we were distracted. But misdirection is essentially just moving a person's attention from the sneaky stuff to the effect, the wow.
Right.
And that can be physical attention, like pointing and body language, and it can be sort of a more analytical attention, and it can be a memory-based attention as well. And so misdirection moves the focus from the magician's world, that method, that sneaky stuff world, into the effect world. But then all storytellers do that. We don't want people to focus on the craft. We want them to focus on the story.
Yes. I think there's here we go. We could do a massive deep dives here in about 3 different areas, but you used the word attention. Now, as anyone who looks at the impact of social media, the impact of technology, the exponential growth of technology, which I spoke about 3 weeks ago, knows that there is a war almost for our attention right now. The social media companies are extremely good at it. They employ people who are extremely good at the right type of language and the right type of algorithms to grab people's attention. Do you ever? I mean, this might not be the case, but I wonder do you ever see the magician's art being deployed in a way by companies to grab our attention? Is that something you ever witnessed or
so I think, like I said, the obvious example is going to be in the likes of advertising, where you're trying to grab people's attention. And I'm being maybe slightly sloppy here. I'm just using attention, but really what I mean is attention and perception. We might see something with our eyes, but do we actually perceive it in our brains as well? And so that misdirection works on both fronts. It's what we look at, but also what we see, and that's a distinction there. And in business and in advertising, often they draw some of those skills that magicians use all the time, but also often they are sort of really innate skills that we have as humans, because if a magician wants you to look at something, often they make a big movement, they make a fast movement, but they hide the sneaky movement in something small and subtle down here, because our reptilian brain will naturally be drawn to the fast big movements, because that could be a tiger wanting to eat us, as opposed to the smaller stuff, and we draw our attention there to the bigger movements and the faster ones. And we can see that in advertising. The sort of the flashy, the quicker, the bigger, the bold grabs our attention more than the smaller, the subtle.
Right. Okay.
So that's one example there.
Very good. And if I was to ask you about something like influence, Charles Randi talked about being an honest liar. He spoke about his magic has been I'm a professional liar. I don't want you to be a liar, but is there something that we could learn from the magician's craft to help us, exert some influence over others, or maybe be more confident, or, is there anything there? Is there a link between, I guess what I'm saying simply is a link between leadership and magic, or between, being a successful person in magic? I mean, I'm probably stretching this a bit far, I get that, but is there anything there you can think of or share with our viewers?
I think one of the turning points for me in my magical career was probably my late teens, when I realized just how powerful, how effective my magic was. There's one trick I used to do with cards, which always got a good reaction. But up until that point, I was really doubting myself and the magic and whether it would work. And I was really fixated by the mechanical things, the sneaky stuff behind the scenes. And when I got to the point when I realized the audience loved what I was doing, suddenly there was like a switch in my head that stopped me focusing almost exclusively on my world and concentrating on their world. And I think for leaders as well, we can often have that, we can often overanalyze our thinking, can't we? And we often have this imposter syndrome that we're not good enough. And that's our world. And what we don't realize is the outside world is experiencing something quite different. And we should perhaps spend more time concentrating on the outer world than being fixated in that inner world. Because as a magician, I know when I start thinking about the position of my hand and maybe is it looking awkward or not, as soon as I start thinking that, my hand becomes even more awkward and my body language betrays that awkwardness. Whereas if I had that confidence that it was going to work, then it would just it become more natural in how I'm holding my hand.
I love that, what you said there about the inner versus outer world, Matt. I think you're absolutely spot on there. I think that's a really interesting observation, because I know personally, and I'd like to ask you the question about this, but when I'm putting a story together, I have to share it, because I will often have, and correct me if this is different to what you're talking about, but I often have internal memories, or because I don't make up stories, I tend to tell my own stories, and I talk about being an archaeologist of your own life, and I try my best, usually using an artifact, to tell the honest truth about what happened in that moment. And quite often that triggers an emotion in me, and people will have seen me on the show, where I can't talk because suddenly I remember, my grandfather or the birth of my children or whatever it was. But sometimes, particularly on stage or when I'm telling a story to someone, not like this, I have to remember that they might not understand that context, and they might think, what's wrong with them? I've had that a few times. Does that resonate, or is that a different point, do you think, to what you were just referring to?
I think what resonates is the keep it personal and keep it into the realms of what you know and your experiences. I work a lot with schools, and do a lot of research into how we can create environments that make people curious. And one of the researchers, Susan Engel, I was talking to, I was asking her, well, what advice would you give to teachers? And she was saying, you have to have that interest yourself. It has to be, you have to be learning yourself, because if you don't, then the pupils will pick up on that and it becomes sort of fake.
Right. That really lovely, and takes me to the thing there's 2 or 3 things I really wanted to ask you today. And one of them was about, you say you're a science magician, and obviously I'm drawn to that. That's in my bubble, definitely. But you talk about wonder, don't you? And you're doing some research into wonder. Can you tell us about that? Because I am absolutely fascinated by it, I have to say.
Yeah. So in lots of ways, people will say that magic and science are in complete polar opposites. That one is trying to understand the world and trying to make it rational, and the other is almost celebrating supernatural and the unbelievable nature of the world. But I don't see it that way. I see both scientists and magicians share this common sense of wonder. So scientists will be fascinated by the world. So fascinated they want to understand how it works, and magicians equally fascinated by the world, but they know that sometimes when you get really fixated by the how of things, that becomes a stumbling block. And so they want to move you past or to circumnavigate the how and move on to now. In fact, let me show you this. So this is taking that science magic thing I showed at the start. So this is with 3 words this time. I made a pyramid here, and an array of pyramids. And if we line it up correctly, we get the word wow. And so for me, this is the first part of the wonder cycle. You have that wow, that surprise moment that's counterintuitive, that brings you to a new territory, really. And then if you twist it round, we end up with this word. We end up with the how. So that's when we try and understand it. And Richard Feynman, a physicist, talks about how you can understand and appreciate the aesthetics, the beauty of a flower. But when you start to understand what a flower is doing with its petals, how it's attracting the bees to cross-pollinate, how the sort of the petals you see differently in the ultraviolet, you can get that second wave of wonder. It doesn't detract from the first one, it adds to it.
Wow.
So we've got the how side of things, but we've also got a third one, which is the now. And that's what I try and move my audiences from. So we go through this cycle of wow, how does it work?
Yeah.
But don't get stuck on the how. Don't leave it as a full stop. Move on to the now. This is where the great questions come in. Now I wonder what else. Now I wonder what if. And so I think the difference between a scientist and magician is the magician, almost like I said, circumnavigates or tries to jump or bypass that how stage and keep it in the background, because they want to move their audiences onto the now, the realm of new possibilities and questions. And of course, it's a cycle. When you ask great questions, you get more moments of wonder, and that leads to more understanding and more how and more now moments. And so I see those fields of being a scientist and a magician in a lot of ways parallel around this idea of wonder. And wonder is this thing that I think is often overlooked. We often talk about wonder and awe being the same thing, or wonder and curiosity being the same thing. And I think, it does have those elements, but there's a third element as well. So curiosity is all about filling the gap in your knowledge when you experience something you don't understand. And awe is when you get to experience something, this perceived vastness, whether that's in size, like comprehending the universe, or whether it's timescales in geology or looking through a microscope, or it can just be something really complex. And so you've got the information gap, you've got this perceived vastness, but awe is very much you're an outside observer. And then the third element for me is this playful element of playing, where it's intrinsically driven, it's free to explore, it's safe to explore, to ask questions. So what is wonder for me? Wonder is filling in gaps in knowledge. It's experiencing brand new awe moments, but it's also playing around and questioning things as well. And I think both magicians and scientists do that.
I have to say that's one of the loveliest expositions of a sort of belief or a model we've ever had on the show. Honestly, I thought that was lovely.
Thank you.
I'm so pleased we're recording it. That's lovely, and I love the idea of a wonder cycle. That's brilliant, Matt. Wow. So I'm going to ask you in a minute. We'll have a quick break, but I'll ask you in a minute to bring your artifact to the table. But while Matt's doing that, I'd just like to remind everybody of a few things that are going on in the background and in the work that I'm doing. Things on here have been really interesting in the last few weeks, and I'm so delighted to have someone of the caliber of Matt here. And in the next few weeks, I've mentioned some of this on social media, but I've got Nancy Duarte coming on, who was the lady behind Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore, his presentation. I've got Robin Dunbar coming on. Robin is a guy who studies human behavior and relationships, and he's moved very much onto social media. So I'm looking forward to that. And I've also got Scottish author, probably the top guy in Scotland right now, called Ewan Morrison, coming on. Ewan's books are extraordinary, and they tell stories about where the future could go. So this is all beautiful linking together. And I have to say, with Matt's Wonder Cycle, he's really got me thinking, because that can really help frame some of the questioning that I'm going to use in the future. But yeah, quite exciting. The other thing that's happening, and I've mentioned this last week, is I'm going to be running a little course every last Thursday of every month, starting this month, and it's going to be online using the Funzing platform, and it's called Storytelling at Work, and it's aimed at people who maybe have reached a point where they can't seem to get that next promotion, they can't seem to get to the next stage, and I'm going to do that in an hour. But I'm going to give you some thoughts and ideas on how to use all of these 33 programs that we've already developed and put out to the cosmos, how to use the learnings from that to actually help you do better in terms of your career and perhaps even your personal life. So let's bring Matt back on. Now, Matt, I've seen your artifact and I love it. But could you share your artifact and tell us the story behind this incredible thing that you brought?
Yeah, so I was...
Oh, sorry. That was my fault. Sorry.
So yeah, I was just on the beach with my family in Cromer, which is just on the east coast of England, and just in the pebbles on the beach, I discovered this. So I'll give you a slightly better view here. So this is a pebble, but it's also been worn away, and in the center of that, there's an even smaller pebble, and it's been wedged there. And I had to when I got home, I got paintbrush and I got some tools, and I just brushed all the sand that was wedged in away, and now we've got this wonderful like dragon's eye, and it's lovely to handle. But also there's so many questions with this of what must have gone on in the oceans to wear that away. Why was it that particular point has got worn away? Was this an old tool that has just washed up, that someone from the past has drilled out and the pebble has somehow got in there? Or was it just the natural forces of the ocean? And then, well, how did that pebble get in there? And then just the fact it looks like an eye as well. So that for me was just a really special find. And it also flags up for me just one of the aspects of wonder is just noticing. I think we often not notice things. They slip by us because life is too busy, and wonder often happens in the gaps. Wonder happens when we slow down. And I think if I was in a rush, I wouldn't have spotted it. It was just the fact I had spent the afternoon just sat chilling with my family that I spotted that.
If I was to ask you, I mean, what you've done there, sorry, I have to put myself back on now. I'm so interested in this. I'm screwing the technology up. I don't normally do that. The idea there of creativity, you mentioned creativity. Where do you get your ideas from? Does it spark off like an artifact like that? Because I could see that turning into a piece. You know, I could really see that. The dragon's eye, I love that. Very evocative. But where do you get your ideas for your magic? Because watching you earlier with your Wonder Cycle, you made that yourself, didn't you? You didn't buy that. You made that. And I've seen you online with I know you've entered competitions and won competitions about, new ideas. Where do you get your ideas from? How do they come? Because creativity is something that, everyone's talking about at the moment. So where do you get yours from? Where do you think it comes from?
I think it comes from a few different areas, and I think it's important to recognize that creativity is inefficient. I think almost by definition, taking a couple of ideas, combine them together to make a third idea, you've lost one in the process.
Yes.
Or we know when we create stuff, half the time or more than half the time, things don't work. And so you've lost things in the process. And so to be creative, I think you constantly need to be feeding your thinking with new ideas, with new experiences. Now, I know both myself and Scott are great readers. We love getting ideas from books. And so my house, as my wife says, is filled with too many books. And so ideas for me come from reading, and often a new idea comes from an old book. I love the old Victorian scientific amusement books, full of things that nowadays are probably illegal because they use chemicals that are unsafe, lots of mercury. Some of it is a part of its time. So there's lots of experiments involving steam engines because that was an obsession back then.
Yes.
But in the middle of it all, there's some beautiful things you can do and play with. And so that becomes this initial spark. And I think very much a bit like an oyster, when you get that grain of grit in the oyster. And if you give it time and if you just keep revisiting those ideas, sometimes you can build something wonderful like a pearl around it. And often that means taking a few different ideas. So where do my ideas, where does my creativity come from? It comes from reading, from feeding, making sure from lots of sources. I rarely read a magic book nowadays because other magicians are doing those tricks, and I want to be different. So I get my ideas from outside the world of magic. They come from long walks, from running, just getting out into nature and just having that time to think and to mull. And it comes from questions. So I'll show you this again. So right at the start, if you missed it, this is like a staircase. It's got the word science, it's got the word magic. I first saw this illusion down in Bristol next to the SS Great Britain. There's a garage nearby. If you, in fact, challenge for you, go onto Google Maps, go find SS Great Britain, explore the local streets near it, see if you can find the garage which has got that illusion on it but with different wording.
And garage, fantastic.
Then I thought, okay, and that they're probably not the first to come up with the idea. Can I do it? And I love understanding the process that needs to be done. What graphics did I need to do to cut and paste the letters to make that word? And then once I'd done that, my mind went in lots of directions. So you saw the wow, how now thing. That's using 3 sides. I thought, well, what do I need? Well, I need something with 3 surfaces. I did try 4 surfaces, but the shapes didn't work as well as I'd liked. I did something different as well. Rather than printing, I cut things out. So what we've got here is 2 words. We've got left and right. If we twist it, and what's great about this, let's see if I've got a photo of this here that I can show you somewhere. Yeah, there we go. This, when you shine a light through, you get the different shadows forming on the wall.
Gosh,
and so it's just wonderful. So that's one direction. And then I started going, well, how else? This time last year, I was obsessed with these, what I call perspectrix illusions, where you can view it from 2 different angles. And so things like this time using glasses and refraction from water and glasses, and you can switch between it, and a host of other things. And then that led to, well, this thing here, this looks like there's nothing there, and then suddenly you've got the word invisible behind that. And what I'm just trying to show you is there's one idea, one bit of inspiration, and a few questions led off in different directions. Now I can't tell you how many dead ends I got along the way, but what you've seen is a few times it worked well.
Yes.
And if you were to look over my shoulder over there, there's boxes of failures, things that haven't worked, but I keep them because I think there's potential for them. And sometimes I just dump the box out on my desk and play with a few ideas and see if I can think of a solution that I didn't have 6 months ago or 18 months ago. And so I'm very much subscribe to the idea of failing fast, of giving it a go, which is why so much of my stuff is made from cardboard and sticky back plastic and all the rest. Those of us watching from the UK will know Blue Peter, and they made all their stuff from sticky back plastic. And I love making it that, because in the space of half an hour I can see, will it work, won't it?
Yes.
And I love the story actually from Pixar, the animation giant. You know those their short 5-minute animations they've got.
Yeah.
I always used to think they were an add-on for the DVDs. If you can remember what DVDs were, they round and you put them in. I thought they were just a little bonus feature. It turns out it was them failing fast. They had a promising director, but weren't sure whether to give them 3 years to make a feature-length film. So they gave them 6 months to make a 5-minute short. Or they had some new rendering software. They weren't sure if it could cut it for a full-length feature film, but they're willing to pay $1 million to make a 5-minute film using new technology. If it worked, great. If it didn't, well, they've not lost much.
Very good. Very good. I have to say, Matt, I love your enthusiasm. It's
I suddenly come alive, don't I, when I just bring up bits of cardboard.
You're making me smile. Like I can't help but smile watching you. It's terrific. Can I ask? I didn't prep you for this question, but it's just an interesting. I think it's a question everybody wonders about. Tell us about the Magic Circle. What's that all about?
So the Magic Circle is a members club. It's based in London, and they've obviously closed with pandemic, but it's also there's a load of building work going on for the HS2, which is a new high-speed train link, which means they've demolished all the neighbouring buildings next to it, which means now you can step out of Euston Station and you'll be able to see the Magic Circle building, which before it was hidden in some of the side streets. It's almost opposite the Welcome collection down in London. And it's got a museum there. It's got a library there. It's got a theatre. It's got a club room. And so once a week, magicians will meet up, just have a chat, have a beer, and watch a lecture or watch a show. But essentially, it's a members club with the aim to promote the art of magic.
Right. And is it something that you're active in, or is it something that it must take some time commitment, I guess, to be active in a community like that?
So I don't physically visit the place that regularly. I go maybe 5-6 times a year, because a lot of my work was moving through London. I'm based in Birmingham. The train route from Birmingham to London comes in at Euston, and so it was convenient for me on a Monday afternoon to go to the Magic Circle, catch up with a few friends, learn a few things, and then later in the evening get a much cheaper train ticket home than the peak rate trains. So I did that. But there's also now with technology, almost all their recent lectures are online in their private groups, so you can access them. And so it's loads of international members. So if you physically can't visit the place, you can visit virtually as well.
I've been once. We took the children there for a Christmas magic show, and they gave us a tour of the building. And it's a lovely place. I mean, it's great for fascinating for the public. I remember the as you walk into the museum on the right, there was a flea circus, like the sort of thing you used to see in all the old movies. It was fantastic. So we're coming. Unfortunately, we've only got a few minutes left now. So I'm desperate to ask you loads of questions here. What's the piece of magic that you're proudest of? What's the one thing that you've created on your own, obviously influenced, as you said earlier, with your books and your reading and all the rest of it, that you think, that's the one I'm really proud of?
Oh, that's such a tough question, Scott. I think it's always the latest thing I'm working on. I've got quite a short attention span, and when I'm working on something new, it becomes an obsession. And the moment I've cracked it and got it working, that's when my interest just evaporates. So I'll often create a new illusion, post it onto Twitter and Instagram, and once it's been posted, then I'm on to the next thing. So that's not really answering your question at all, is it, Scott? But maybe I can give you an example of something that I really, really like. And I'm going to choose one that illustrates for me the wow, how now aspect of things, because I'm going to show it you 3 times. The first time is going to be using, you're going to see the trick. And then the second time, you're going to have a backstage view and you're going to see how it works. And what you'll realize is it happened far too quick. So you're going to get to see it a 3rd time in slow motion. So here we go. So this is a little minor obsession of me of how reflections turn into reality.
Yeah.
So let's have this side view, and I'm going to show it in parallel to the main view. And it just sort of pops up, and then let's see it again in slow motion. What we call a self-assembling net. It just
wow.
Some string just pulls up, and so it's a known mathematical thing that I've read about, and I thought, well, could we try and conceal it and turn it into a trick? And so that's something. When I finally got to capture that and saw it in slow motion, that was like, yeah, that is a great moment. So that's one I particularly like.
That is a work of art. I mean, that is fantastic, man. Thank you very much. You know what you do? You sell smiles. I mean, I'm got a sore face smiling at you. Fantastic.
I only smile when I'm talking about these illusions. Most of the time, I'm like deadpan.
If I was to ask you for a recommendation, if someone was interested who's watching in magic and wanted to learn a little bit more about it, is there a book or a film or something that you would say, yeah, that I would start with that. I would look at that. Obviously, watch Matt Pritchard's work, but what else? What would you like people to?
So I think if you want to see good magic, and one of the best ways to do that currently is to watch the Penn and Teller Fool Us TV series, and leaving aside the whole concept of trying to fool Penn and Teller, what it's great for is showcasing magicians at their best. They pick their favorite tricks and they work many months in doing that, and it's filmed well and it's done in a respectful way. So if you want to watch good magic, that's a great place to find good magic. If you want to learn magic, I always say go to the books, because if you watch a short YouTube video, you'll learn a trick, but you won't learn magic. And a book I'm particularly fond of, and I think is really good and completely underrated, is a book by the American TV magician Mark Wilson, and it's usually called The Complete Course in Magic or something similar. They've rebranded it a few times, but Mark Wilson's Complete Course in Magic. It's a massive, thick hardback book, full of magic, and not just coins and not just cards, but big illusions and props. And you'll learn good sleight of hand, and you also learn some of the other tools that magicians use as well. So that's a great starting point.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much. I have to say, I love the Penn and Teller show myself. It's a terrific show. And I love the dynamic they have on that show between them, and also between the respect that you can feel between the magicians and Penn and Teller, and how much respect Penn and Teller have for the magicians. It's wonderful. There's a real human element to it. So yeah, thank you for that. And for everyone watching, I'll grab a copy of the book that Matt's recommended, and I'll put it in the description on the YouTube version of this. So if you just bear with me, I can do that. Matt, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, wanted to book you, wanted to see your other work, I've got a note of the Wonder website here. Is there anything else you'd like to point people towards?
Yeah, so the wordsandwonder.com is a project of mine, which essentially exploring the idea of wonder by interviewing fascinating people. So we've got Helen Sharman, Britain's first astronaut. We've got bishops, we've got con artists, all the way through to zoologists, really asking them what they do for their work and what makes them curious. And there's 130 odd interviews there, explorers, philosophers, theologians, the lot. So I encourage you just to dip in for your own interest. My own website is sciencemagicshows.co.uk. That's predominantly aimed at my main market, which is working with schools, teaching science, maths, but also teaching critical thinking, creative skills.
Yes.
But I'd love to connect with people on Twitter and Instagram, and it's just simply Science Magician. Of late, as I mentioned, I post lots of illusions. Some of them are puzzles for you to look at. Hopefully they put a smile on your face and a few wow moments as well. And business-wise, I work with companies and organizations to look at how we can create environments that foster this wonder, how we can create environments that's safe to ask questions and discover new things, to bring wonder and curiosity both to the workforce, but also to your customers as well.
Fantastic. Matt, that has been a privilege. I have really enjoyed that. And I would love to have spent more time talking about critical thinking and about the other work that you do. So maybe if you're up for it, we could maybe have you on again to talk about that.
Yeah, I'd love to, Scott.
Because there's a whole world there that I'd love to get into. But thank you ever so much. I mean, that was terrific. Tuning in from the States, we've had people coming in. Well, who have we got here? We've got Sharon Gordon from Stourbridge. So we've had quite a mixture of people come in. So thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I really do hope that we get a chance to talk to you again on the show. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah. And hopefully we can grab a beer when it's back to great normality, Scott. Yeah, that'd be good. If not, a cup of tea.
That's for sure. There's plenty of stories to be told about that. I think that was brilliant. I loved that Wonder Cycle piece. Do you know, I've heard Matt talk about that before. And from the sort of the wow to the how he talks about, he didn't quite say that today, but that's what he often talks about when he's presenting. And I love it. And put into that context, it's got my brain firing in all sorts of directions. So, Matt, that was first class. So I hope you enjoyed this week's show. I really did. I don't think I've ever smiled so much. Even when I've had a comedian on, I think I've smiled as much as I've smiled today with Matt. So that's a sign of he sells smiles as well. But I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. I felt more like a viewer today than a host. So it was great. Next week, I'm hoping to have Ewan on next week, Ewan Morrison, the Scottish writer. And I'm excited about that because he's a pure storyteller. I mean, people like me and Matt tell stories as part of our roles and a part of our jobs, part of our passions. But his craft is storytelling. So I'm hoping Matt will be on next week. A couple of things going on in the background that might make it not happen, but I think we're going to record it on Thursday. So fingers crossed that goes ahead. If not, we'll come up with something else. So I'm also looking forward to meeting Nancy Duarte. Can't believe she's coming on the show. And Professor Robin Dunbar's coming on as well the next couple of weeks. So we've got quite a few, really building on today's wonderful experience with Matt. We've got some really interesting people coming on the show over the next few weeks. I'd just like to remind you of something. And I know there's some new people on today that might not have heard me say this before. The reason I started to do this, and specifically started to do it during lockdown, is because I really thought there was a need for more empathy in the world. I didn't see enough understanding of what it was like to be other people. And Matt touched on this when he talked about the inner and outer work. I thought it was, again, a very beautiful part of the discussion. And I think one of the best examples of this, or the best ways of putting this together, was by a guy called Chris Riddell, who was the UK Children's Laureate. And he said this, he said, a good story or a good book helps you understand the world through the eyes of others. And a good book can act as an empathy engine. And I love that. And I mean, I've taken that and now talk about how a good story can act as an empathy engine. And if you've enjoyed today and you want to explore more about it, I've just started a new Facebook group called The Empathy Engine, where we've got a small group of people, it's only about 50 people, where we're sharing stories, sharing experiences, trying to get better at this, because I do honestly believe that stories are super, super important. So I hope after today and after that wonderful piece by Matt, I really hope you go off and you start to look for your own stories, because you know what? These stories can change the world. Thanks very much for tuning in to the show this week. My name is Scott McArthur, and I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday morning at the same time, 11:30 UK time, across the social media platforms. Thanks very much.